The assembly is called to order. Let's rise and sing together verse 3. That's hymn 504, A Mighty Fortress is Our God.
Acknowledge how awesome Eric's been. Thank you. What a delight. Thank you. You may be seated. How was lunch? Let's acknowledge AJ and his team for how awesome lunch was. Now, here's the thing. I know in my own body and mind, 2 p.m. hits, and it doesn't matter what I'm doing, I'm automatically sleepy. So, I apologize for putting the budget in this plenary session. What was I thinking? But in reality, it's incredibly beautiful and important work that we're doing together, and I'm so grateful you all are here. Please do continue to take care of yourselves as we continue through this session. I mentioned a little bit before that I have some Methodist roots, and so it is my delight to introduce to you the Reverend Park Hunter, who is the Northeast District Superintendent of the Wisconsin Conference of the United Methodist Church. Reverend Hunter is a second career pastor who previously owned a computer consulting business in Indiana. He earned his Master of Divinity degree from Duke Divinity School in 2010, where he was recognized with a university-wide Chester Middleton Prize for Graduate Research. Also, his seminary won the NCAA tourney that year. Important detail to share with you all. Reverend Hunter has served churches in Indiana, North Carolina, and Wisconsin. He helped lead rural churches to host the first ever interracial ecumenical services in Caswell County, North Carolina, and has helped lead UMC churches in Wisconsin to reconciling ministry status. He finds a particular blessing in ecumenical ministry. In 2022, Bishop Hee-Soo Young appointed Reverend Hunter as superintendent overseeing 86 churches. His wife, Annalisa Hunter, is also a UMC pastor. I know. He enjoys hiking, camping, games, science fiction and fantasy, antique cars, and model trains. Pastor Park, thank you so much for being with us today. Let's welcome him.
Yeah, so they gave me the after lunch slot. That might be because we've had the right reverend and the most reverend, and now I'm just kind of the other reverend. So. Good afternoon and greetings on behalf of Bishop Hee-Soo Young of the Wisconsin Annual Conference of the United Methodist Church. I am Pastor Park Hunter. I'm the Northeast District Superintendent for Wisconsin, or as I like to say, I am the superintendent for the Green Bay Packers. I'm not joking. Bart Starr was a Methodist, and the job comes with season tickets. I am delighted to be here with you today for a number of reasons. And first of all, we heard from a Methodist who is now a Lutheran. I grew up Presbyterian. I married into an ELCA family, and now we're Methodist. But I blame my call on my wife's side of the family. Her grandfather, the Reverend Alvar Walfrid, served churches mostly in Minnesota, although he did some mission time in Iowa. But among his children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren are now 14 pastors, global missionaries, and Christian authors in a variety of denominations, including my wife and I. Thank you. And our young adult son, who is finishing his 2-year tour as a global mission fellow for our church, and will be coming back and appointed to a student church this summer as he begins seminary. So, woohoo. PKs, you're doomed. As I mentioned, the family has strong Lutheran roots, but they branched out. And some years ago, we went to a family funeral in the Twin Cities. It was in a Lutheran church, but it was brand X. It was not ELCA. And the family was gathered before the service to visit and celebrate, really, because this was an uncle who had lived a long and wonderful life. But somebody ratted me out. You know, pastors, maybe you've had this experience. Sometimes people think if there are two pastors in a room and they don't know each other, they should be introduced because they probably have pastory things they've got to talk about. So somebody ratted me out, and I saw the Lutheran pastor making a beeline across the room to speak to me. And he leaned into me and said, "So, you're Methodist?" I'm like, yeah? He said, "You Methodists, you're like the test pilots of grace. You're always pushing it to the outer limits." I'm not sure he meant that as a compliment. And yet, you know what I heard? I'm a test pilot. Also, it kind of seemed to me like this brand X Lutheran pastor was forgetting his own roots. For aren't Lutherans also the people of sola gratia, grace alone? In my experience, both ELCA Lutherans and United Methodists are known as people of extreme grace. Because honestly, what are the outer limits of God's grace? We worship a God who loved us so much that he gave his only Son, that whoever believes in him might not perish, but have eternal life. That's good news, isn't it? What are the limits on that? I don't see any limits. United Methodists are famously known for our slogan, open hearts, open minds, and open doors. I would add to that list, open tables. We don't place limits on who can participate at communion on Sunday, for we feel that Eucharist is a means of God's grace, and we can't put a limit around that. And we share this open communion table with the good folks of the ELCA as we are in shared communion. And what a powerful witness we are when we join together around the table of grace as we will today. And this is a second reason that I am glad to worship with you. Now, in 3 weeks, the Wisconsin Conference of the United Methodist Church will gather for our annual meeting in Green Bay at the KI Center. And if you pay attention to the news, you may have heard that some churches are leaving the United Methodist denomination because they disagree with our progress toward opening our churches fully to participation by LGBTQ folks. It's an echo of the same distress that you endured some years ago. And we will sadly at this annual conference be saying farewell to about 44 of our 450 churches here in Wisconsin. I know, prayers are welcome. I've been walking with the churches in my district on this path, and I'm going to bless them on the way out because they're being faithful to the best of their ability. Well, it used to be standard at Methodist conferences to open with a certain Charles Wesley hymn. And 250 years ago, this hymn made a lot of sense because the life of frontier circuit riders was hard. And the words that they sung were no joke, they were serious. In fact, the book sales from United Methodist Publishing Houses have, for the entire history of the denomination, up to and including today, been set aside for the care of tired and worn out preachers. Anybody feel like a tired and worn out preacher? Today, Christians, we are still facing challenges. We've been battered by the culture wars, by the pandemic, by politics, by the secularization of American culture. And I think some of the verses still speak to us. And so we've been singing Martin Luther all day. I'm going to invite us to sing a little bit of Charles Wesley. I'm going to invite you to join me in singing this infamous, immortal Charles Wesley hymn sung at Methodist conventions for 250 years. And are we yet alive? And I believe we're going to put the lyrics up on the screen. Amen. Also, props to Eric the organist. He didn't know he was doing that till about 15 minutes ago. So Bishop Ann asked those of us who are visiting to reflect on Jesus' prayers for his followers in John 17:11, that they might be one as we, Jesus said, God and Jesus are one. So how do we do that in the midst of divisions and denominations and all kinds of stress in our society? Well, in that same farewell discourse, Jesus gave us the key. He told us a new commandment: to love one another as he had loved us. And that is how people will know that we are his disciples, if we love one another. Simple. Hard. I've been sitting here this morning admiring this beautiful church, but I've been puzzling over the look of Jesus in the stained glass window. And I'm thinking to myself, he's thinking to himself, what part of love one another don't you understand? Friends, what better witness of unity and love than when we gather together as we are today? I am so grateful for my friends in the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, for your faithfulness and for our gathering today to love one another, to break bread together, to witness to God's unlimited, extreme grace. Because, friends, we are yet alive by the redeeming power of Christ. Amen. Not quite done yet. So we've been asked to share a prayer or some reflection from our theological traditions. And Methodists, although we are definitely people of grace, we're saved by grace alone, John Wesley talked about us as people of practical divinity, that if we truly believe in that grace, if we truly experience God's love, that we are compelled to respond to that by expressing tangible love in the world. And so rather than a prayer, I'm going to share with you probably one of the more famous things that John Wesley said. It was his rule. So do all the good you can, by all the means you can, in all the ways you can, in all the places you can, at all the times you can, to all the people you can, as long as ever you can. Be blessed, friends.
They say that when Wesley and Luther come together, our hearts are warmed. Our hearts are warmed. So if you're feeling that's what you're feeling. That's our hearts being warmed. Bishop Ricken and Maximus are going to head out. Bishop Ricken has confirmation to go to. So one more round of applause and thanks to our Roman Catholic friends and colleagues. And thanks again to Pastor Park. It was my joy to be present for the United Methodist gathering last year, and I am grateful to share in the work of the gospel alongside you and all of the people that you serve too. Amen. In April, our Synod Racial Equity team hosted a land acknowledgement panel to listen and learn about the impact and importance of authentic land acknowledgements. We learned that there is much to learn. The Racial Equity Team and the Land Acknowledgement Task Force are excited to share more resources with you in the coming months. Take a look at this video.
There are 574 federally recognized tribes in the United States. And when you look at the disparities that exist on these tribal reservations, with 40% poverty rates and a lot of other systematic barriers that exist, from access to quality health care, education, and meeting the basic needs of our people in exchange for what was given, it is quite elusive.
It's something Indian people do these days, just pro forma, to help our white relatives. Unfortunately, I think we're helping our white relatives just feel better about themselves, feel more self-justified. If they can do a land acknowledgement, the unwritten text is there. We've respected you. Can we keep your land now? I'll tell you what a real land acknowledgement might look like. I mean, you all have been there. You've seen land acknowledgements. How long do they take? 90 seconds? 2 minutes max?
And to ask the question, How is it and why is it that the claim of a right of domination has been made the organizing principle of the society and the organizing principle of the planet? That's not our claim of a right of domination as original nations and peoples at all. That came from across the ocean.
I'm part of this environment. I don't want to conquer it, and I don't really view myself as an owner.
How in the heck did they do that? How could they have went through boarding schools? How could they have went through forced relocation? All these diseases, all these things that happen to us as a people. How could they have gone through something like that and kept a bit of their dignity?
Hello, my name is Miles Applemont Miller. I'm a Mohican tribal member, and I'm gonna play you a song.
Conversation in the panel was really good because it was difficult, because it wasn't one-sided, because it wasn't fake. I mean, it was real, and people need to hear it, need to know that natives have struggled, have been hurt and betrayed, and are still willing to engage. But that there's a lot of history, a lot of baggage, and a lot of work that us white people need to work on. Because it can't be all on their end. And that's, so many times that's the ask. Oh, teach us about your history, teach us everything. They're exhausted just surviving. So, need to do the hard work together.
Thank you. I now call again on Vice President Nancy Shanke for a credentials report.
Members as of 1:15. We have 258 voting members as of 1:15 p.m.
We will now hear a report from our treasurer, John Herder. John will present the 2024 budget for consideration before the Assembly, which you can find in Section 5 of your Assembly book. John has served as treasurer of the Synod and has been a vital member of the executive team since 2021. He is a longtime faithful leader in the church and the community and a member of Redeemer Lutheran Church. Redeemer and Church of the Intercession Episcopal together are the beloved community in Stevens Point. Welcome and thank you, John.
Thank you, Bishop. Get the applause over with now. You might not want to applaud at the end. This afternoon, I'm going to be addressing three topics. Treasurer's report for the year just ended, our fiscal year 2022. The budget report for 2024, and that will be followed with a motion for adoption for your consideration. And then finally, the endowment committee has a set of protocols that they follow. There's a motion will be presented to change those protocols, to update them. That should take about 20 minutes. So those of you that are in need of a nap, wake up in about 20 minutes. First, treasurer's report. There is a written treasurer's report in the binder. It's in section 1 of the Assembly book, and it provides more detail than I'm going to go into today. But that report and my talk today have 4 basic topics: the operational results for 2022, the endowment fund, the Synod office building, which we got some good news on that this morning, and the 2022 audit. I'm going to briefly touch on each of those 4 topics in this discussion about the Treasurer's Report. First off, the operational results. I've got 2 key observations for you. Number 1, revenues, and obviously in particular the mission support from congregations was down again last year. In 2022, we failed to meet our budget, and our revenues in 2022 were the lowest annual revenues in the history of the Synod. This decrease, it's a continuation of a pattern that's been happening for over 20 years. Actual expenses were held down below budget levels, held down almost the level of the income. We had about a 2% shortfall in our budget for 2022. The bottom line total was a $31,000 deficit. A question that came to me last year when I reported a similar result, is that concerning that we had a $31,000 budget deficit? In my opinion, no. That is so close to a zero break-even budget, that is not a concern. What is a concern is that it's been coming down and down and down and down. So it's the pattern. It's not a snapshot. This year we were $31,000 down. It's the motion picture that says this is where we're headed. And so changes need to be made. And the open question is, are those changes going to be made to the income side of the equation, or are we going to have to make changes to the expense side of the equation? So that's one of the 2 major operational results that I wanted to touch on. The other one is equally a negative. Our asset base over 2022 fiscal year, in addition to the small loss in operations, we also took a pretty good hit on the stock market. So the endowment fund is about $180,000 lower at the end of 2022 than it was at the beginning. That obviously is more of a concern on a one-time basis. That's not a pattern. The pattern has been increasing asset values for years, and our endowment has historically been growing. The point about that I wanted to also make about the endowment fund, the loss in the fund was entirely due to the equity markets. There were no operational changes that we made that would have impacted it. The endowment committee continues to target an 8% annual return on investments over the course of time. Obviously, with the market going up and down, you don't hit that every year, and last year was an off year. The endowment committee continues to provide 5% of the asset base to operations to support Synod missions. We did that last year. We take a 3-year average of the asset base and provide that. The asset mix remains steady through the year. We started and ended the year with 80% equities, 17% bonds, and 3% in cash or cash equivalents. So in summary, the decrease was not due to anything other than a decline in the market. Third topic I wanted to touch on in this part of the report, property. We are making a change in how we're accounting for property within the operational budget. In the 2022 year, the building and its heat and water and insurance and all those property-related expenses were actively in support of the mission of the church. 2023, we've made the decision to sell the building. It's no longer being used for the operations of the church. We have moved those expenses, basically, and if there was any rental income or that kind of thing, that would have been moved out as well. Moving that out of the operational budget so that the operational budget talks about the mission-related operations. So in 2023 and in the budget we're proposing for 2024, there won't be any property insurance in that budget because it's been moved out of the operations. And the fourth thing I want to touch on is audit. We have been using Erickson & Associates of Appleton to perform annual audits. We've contracted with them to perform fiscal audits of fiscal year 21 and 2022. in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles, which is how they do their audits of businesses. At this point, those audits have not been finalized. When they are finalized, they will be made available to the congregations. You can request, if you want to see that, you can request that from the office, and it will be provided to you. But as a result of the audits not being completed, I just want to put an asterisk on any of the numbers from 21 and 22 that are in this report, in the Assembly book. Those are pre-audit and subject to change should the auditor find something. And one other thing, and I have crossed off what I had in my written script. I'm simply going to piggyback and say thank you to Pastor Fry for making a big thank you to all of you and your congregations for the benevolence, the dollars that you share for not just mission support, but also the Lutheran World Relief, Lutheran Disaster Relief, one of them's response, not relief, I don't know which is which, Crossways Camps, all the other ministries that our church supports, that you support with your dollars. So thank you very much for that. Okay, now I'm going to move into the budget presentation. So now we're going to be looking at 2024, forward-looking rather than backwards-looking. In section 5 of the Assembly book, there's a document entitled 2004 Narrative Budget. I think that's supposed to be 2024. So I don't know whether this is just my own notes to myself that's wrong or if it's actually wrong in the book, but obviously we're talking about 2024. And then there's a second exhibit, 2024 Budget Comparison. They're basically the same numbers. The first page shows the 2024 budget along with some pie charts for those of you that prefer pictures to numbers. And then the second one doesn't have the pie charts, but has a history of what the actual results have been. These two exhibits lump our expenses and our revenue, our funds available, into some fairly large groupings. And those of you that might be interested in more detail than what's there, we do have some handouts available. I'm not sure where they would be. Jeannie has them. You can simply request that, and you can get a line item showing, 50 lines of data where I'm showing 5 or 6 here. So, the budget, as it's proposed, meets a number of key objectives. The projected numbers we believe to be realistic. The income estimates are based on past results as well as the information that many of the congregations have provided through their intent statements. The expenses reflect the Synod's mission plans, and projected expenses and projected funds available are reasonably close, yielding a virtually balanced budget. Again, the number happens to be a negative small value at the end, but I'm not concerned about a 1% differential on that size of a budget. As it's always been the case, the vast majority of the Synod's funds will be from mission support from congregations. And I want to thank those congregations who did reply with their intention statements. That kind of information is very helpful for the planning process that goes into the budget. 2024 budget has projected mission support of $1.2 million. That's 79% of our anticipated available funds for that year. The budget funds available is lower than 2023, and it's much more consistent with the actual receipts from recent years rather than the optimistic projection that went into the 2023 budget. In 2023, 45% of the mission support funds are being contributed to the churchwide operations to support its missions. That percentage is being raised from 45% to 46% in the 2024 budget that's being presented here. That's consistent with the plan that the Assembly voted on last year. Our intent is to take that percentage up by 1% each year for a 5-year period till we're back at 50% support. Seminary support is 5% of the mission support for 2024 budget. That's unchanged from recent history. Other sources of funds for the operating budget are from fees charged for initiatives, including this Synod Assembly. If your congregation's paid fees to have you attend here, that's part of that Synod events and initiatives. That makes up 11% of the projected budget, projected funds available for 2024. And then the third major area is, in this budget, is distributions from the endowment fund. That will provide about 7% of the funds available for 2024. I want to point out that this last item, the inclusion of endowment distributions in the 2024 budget, that's a change in how we have budgeted previous years. In previous years, the treasurer prior to me and me last year, we compared income to expenses, and the funds we receive from the endowment really are not income from operations. They're income from investments. And so they were excluded from an income expense comparison. As we talked about it this year, I personally felt, and others agreed with me, it makes more sense for us to budget on the funds that are going to be available for use by the general fund. And so we've included the distribution from endowments as a funds available, even though it's not an income item. Another change from 2022 and prior years is in the expense portion of the budget. Property and technology budgeted expenses are about $50,000 less than recent history would suggest, and that's exactly from what I had talked about previously. We are pulling the building and its related expenses out of the operational budget that we're dealing with here and treating them separately. The anticipated expenses for fiscal 2024 are approximately $23,000 above anticipated funds available. That's a small projected deficit of a little over 1%. The Synod Council has reviewed the fiscal 2024 budget as it's presented here in the Assembly book and has voted it to present it to the Assembly for approval. On behalf of the Synod Council, I move adoption of the 2024 budget as presented in the Assembly handbook.
I'm going to remind folks how to speak and present this budget now. If anybody needs to stretch, like if you need to stand while I'm doing the reminder of how to speak, without disturbing the people around you, I would invite you stand if you need to. If you need to stand, you can stand. Yeah, it's no shame in it. If you need to stand, you can stand. Do a little stretch. And I'm going to do the reminder of how to speak while we're getting some stretches in. This budget is for the fiscal year beginning on February 1st, 2024. The budget comes to the Assembly recommended for adoption by the Synod Council. Since it is recommended by the Synod Council, no second is needed, and the budget is properly before the Assembly. I'm going to remind us how to speak. Please bring either your red card against, your green card for, or your white card, point of order or other appropriate motion, to the microphone with you to clearly indicate what you will be speaking about. These can be found in the white envelope that you received at registration. When called upon, I will announce the microphone number, and then you will be asked to begin by stating your full name, your congregation, and town. Each person will be allowed 2 minutes to speak, and we will alternate between green and red cards. White cards will always be moved to the front of the line. There will be a yellow flag raised at the 30 seconds left point, and a red flag will be raised to indicate the end of 2 minutes. Is there anyone wishing to speak to the motion to adopt the budget for fiscal year 2024? I don't see anyone moving to the microphone, so we'll move to voting. All in favor of the motion to adopt the budget, raise your green cards now. You may put down your cards. All opposed to the motion, raise your red cards now. You may put down your cards. The 2024 budget has been adopted. Thank you, John, for this good and faithful work, and thank you again to this assembly for the mission support that makes our ministry possible. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Tangential to the budget and mission support is the tool we have for the ministry through the endowment. At this time, I call on Synod Treasurer John Herder to share proposed updates to our Synod endowment protocols on behalf of the endowment team.
Thank you for that vote. I've been church treasurer off and on for probably, 15 years at different churches that I've been a member of. I don't ever recall a church annual budget being approved with no comments against something. So thank you for that. The endowment. The endowment follows a set of protocols that it established quite early on. The endowment protocols were established in 1990, and they were approved by the Synod Assembly at that time. There have been some minor changes to the protocols since then, which have been approved by the Synod Council but never brought before the Synod Assembly. As I look through the things that we were changing and proposing in this, I count 4 different reasons for the current proposals, 2 big ones and 2 that are yes, they're reasons, but they're not very significant. First, 30 years ago, very little attention in the investment world was paid by investors to anything other than what's the expected rate of return from this company? What are they kicking out as dividends? What's their expected growth? That kind of a thing. Nowadays, it's very routine for investment decisions to be evaluated not just on their anticipated financial returns, but also other aspects of the companies being invested in, their impact, the company's impact on the environment. Do they act in a socially responsible manner? How is their governance set up? Is it structured in a diversified and equitable and inclusive manner? Those are things that are now being considered, and the Endowment Committee felt we should be incorporating some of these concepts into our investment strategy as well, and we want to get them into the governance document, the protocols. Second, the decision to sell the Synod office triggered conversations and thoughts about what should the Endowment Committee's role be involved here, how should we account for the real estate while we're holding it and trying to sell it, or if it didn't sell, if we were leasing it out or whatever. The conversations went beyond just the current office building sale, but also to what if we get real estate into the Synod's into the Synod from other means. If someone dies and leaves property to the Synod, if a church disbands and they leave a building behind, there are steps involved, but a potential outcome is that the Synod inherits that property. How do we deal with that? As we thought it through, the endowment fund already holds significant assets of the Synod. The assets don't directly impact mission, but the return on investment from those assets supports mission. And the same could be done with real estate as can be done with a stock or a bond. From a lease or a rent or a sale, it could generate an income stream to support mission. And so we developed some protocols that would allow the endowment fund to hold real estate, which the current protocols don't even consider. Third, as I mentioned, there have been several minor changes over the years that have never been brought to the Synod Assembly, so now is the time to bring them here. And fourth, it was recommended by our parliamentarian that there's an opportunity right now to clean up some language issues to make things clear and make some of the language consistent and so on. And so we've incorporated some revised language for that purpose. The proposed modifications contemplate these 4 items I just talked about. And on behalf of the Synod Council, I make a motion to approve the revised endowment protocols as amended following publication in the Assembly Book.
Because this motion comes to us from Synod Council, it does not require a second. As John just referred to in his motion, the proposed endowment protocols were included in the initial publishing of the Assembly Book. After having been reviewed by our parliamentarian, edits were suggested and have therefore been included for your review in Section 9 of the Assembly Book. Is there anyone wishing to speak to the motion? Just making sure that people who are standing are stretching and not going to the microphone. I don't see anyone going to the microphone, so we'll move into voting. All in favor of the motion to adopt the proposed amendments to the endowment protocols, raise your green cards now. You may put down your cards. All opposed to the motion, raise your red cards now. You may put down your cards. The endowment protocols have been adopted. I would like to extend our thanks, if we can extend our thanks to John, the members of the Endowment Committee, and special thanks to Walt Rugland for his faithful leadership of the Endowment Committee. Can we say thanks? Yeah. We will take a brief recess to stretch and tend to our bodies and connect with one another. We will return for Plenary 4. Oh, it's not going to be that brief. This is a good recess. We will be back at 3 p.m. The Assembly is in recess until 3 p.m.